program today is going to be about the diamond match here in Chico. And really, when historians and people who are familiar with the Chico story look back at our Chico story and maybe try to pick out just a handful of the most important facets in the Chico story that really helped to elevate Chico above Los Molinos and Gridley and even above Oroville. What was that? What really pushed Chico and elevated this community up above those others there, and really as one of the most prominent cultural centers in the North Valley? And certainly Diamond Match and the earlier Sierra Lumber Company story really quickly come floating right up to the top there. So this was, in its day, one of the most important events in Chico. The Diamond Match deciding to come here and put together their two-pronged, large, industrial level, state-of-the-art mill in Sterling City, where Diamond would use the mountain lands around Sterling City to harvest the wood, bring it into the Sterling City mill up the wood. Then they had built a railroad connecting Sterling City and Chico, bring the milled up wood down, and the Chico plant here could make stuff out of all of that wood. So we're going to hear about that story today. And so just within the last year or so, two real Chico stalwarts, both of them been here a long time, Don Alger and Ray Rolls, picked up that interest in the Diamond Match story, and they've put together this program today. Don Alger.
Well, thanks, Dave, and thank you all for coming. Got a little croak in my voice here. Let me introduce my counterpart, who prefers to remain in the background, but Ray Rolls is, raise your hand, Ray, so everybody knows where you are. So Ray has respectively declined to really say anything during the presentation at my insistences, but he will be available afterward for questions. And in that note, probably works best if you keep your questions till the end, but if you have a burning question as I proceed, don't feel like you can't ask it. My focus will not be disrupted, I hope. So as you know, we're going to hear about Diamond Match. Can everybody hear me without me worrying about the microphone too much?
You gotta stay on the mic.
Pardon?
You gotta stay on the mic.
Well, he's got his own mic.
No, that's the recording mic.
Okay. So you may wonder how a retired chemist and a retired engineer got involved in this history project. So let me warn you right up front, this may be the longest introduction to a talk you're ever going to hear. So Ray and I belong to a retirement group called Sons in Retirement, and they started a history group. And I was inquiring, what could we do? What would people be interested in? And this is where I blame Ray for this whole thing. Ray said, well, you know, I've lived in Chico my whole life, and I know practically nothing about Diamond Match. And I said, well, I came in '68, and I don't know really anything about Diamond Match. So this sounds like a good project. And when I don't think I used the term project, because my idea was I will find a speaker to come talk to the group. And after searching high and low, there was no one in Chico that felt like they could do that. So I thought, well, there must be some kind of concise piece of information that would give us the chronology. Oops. So this just gives you a location. The Diamond Match, now known as Barber Yard, is down here. So my idea, and Ray would probably tell you he had no idea what to expect, but my idea was to develop a chronology, just a little brief chronology, so I would have some idea of what had happened at Diamond Match. And I don't remember the timing, but that didn't take too much work. So if that's where it had ended, we would all be able to go home now. But part of my long-winded introduction has to do with what happened, because we ended up with, I keep doing that. A 90-plus page document, which we hesitantly call a book, but let me digress for a moment. That is available as a PDF digital file that you're welcome to have, and what you need to do is just email me, and we have 3 brochures here that gives you an outline, and also in there is a little pull-off tab with my email. If you're interested in getting a digital copy of it, you're welcome to it. For a variety of reasons, we decided we didn't want to try to publish it in a more formal format. So how did we get to this point? Darn it. So how did this happen? So I have to interject a little humor here in this long-winded introduction. And I want to take you back to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland story. And this is a picture of Alice going down a rabbit hole. So So I'm not getting back. Okay. So this has become a metaphor in our society for getting into a situation that becomes much more involved than was anticipated, and that certainly is true. And Ray Rolls, among his many talents, he's a Photoshop guru, and this is a picture of the match factory. And early on, I got an email from Ray with this picture kind of describing what was going on in our process. So I don't know how he did this with all the rabbit holes and the rabbits scurrying around, but as you'll see as we go on, that's Ray. So part of what I want to do here is to tell you a little bit about what I'm not going to talk about today, and that will give you also a little insight into how we got to a 90-page document. And it also will give you a little insight on what, if you're interested, you might find in the book that you're not going to hear about today. So, topics not covered. This is from Ray's rabbit hole experiences. He, and to some extent I, did a lot of reading and writing about early Butte County logging, way before Diamond Match came. We had a lot of trouble figuring out the details of the purchase of the property and the map that would account for the acres that they purchased. Diamond Match, another slight digression, Sierra Lumber preceded them as a lumber company, and they used flumes to transport lumber, milled lumber, down to Chico. And Diamond Match decided early on that they weren't going to do that, and they were going to do their logging transportation with railroads, which involved building a railroad track up to Sterling City, and we're not going to talk about that. There could be, and I think maybe you had a talk a year ago or something on Sterling City Sawmill and Sterling City. Anyway, there's a full lecture there that we're not going to talk about. So I can't blame it all on Ray, because I spent a fair amount of time underground also. And being a chemist, I was fascinated by match chemistry. That's in the book, and I'm not sure why it's there, except that I'm a chemist and I thought it was really fascinating. We did a lot of work on the history of the Diamond Match, going back to the beginning of their life, and a little bit, and this is one of the things that we could expand on, is the history of the Diamond Match administration. And there's a little bit in the book about Dean, but not a whole lot. And I'm not going to talk about that either. So typically, acknowledgments come at the end of a lecture, but since I have a long-winded introduction, I thought I'd throw it in here. I want to acknowledge Scott Blackman, who was an engineer, worked with Ray, and Ray and he spent a lot of time with deeds and maps and whatnot, and he was really, we have a lot of maps, which is Scott Blackman's doing for the most part. And it turns out, I just learned the other day from Ray that his dad was the operator or the head honcho of the Diamond Match apiary for many years.
Grandfather.
Huh?
His grandfather.
His grandfather, okay. So I don't know if Liz Stewart is here or John Gallardo. So we need to acknowledge the Chico Heritage Association in general, and Liz Stewart and John Gallardo were just instrumental in working with us. John, I don't remember if he did one or two edits of early drafts, but Liz was just amazing. You'd ask her something, and if she couldn't find it immediately, why, she was off on a research project. So what are we going to talk about today? Basically, the development of the barber facility, the match factory, and the millworks, remanufacturing. Those are terms that apply not to the sawmill, but to what they do with the lumber after it gets here. A little bit about the demise, and a little bit about the legacy. Actually, Liz Stewart and Paul Lieberman gave a talk a month ago or whatever on the barber neighborhood, and that's certainly part of that legacy. Okay, we're getting into the meat of the subject. The original purchase is shown here with color overlays. This is the main facility of the match, the millworks, the lumbering, and somebody may be wondering, what is this white thing up here in the corner? That is currently, and was never part of Diamond Match, but it's currently a RV storage facility that was built in the late 80s after Louisiana Pacific purchased the site. I don't know how many hours, how many trips to Orville Ray took to find out the exact acreage of the match factory. That's the one in the orange. So Diamond Match purchased this little area separately on their own. Over here is kind of another issue that I'm not going to dwell on much, but this became an agricultural area, and as a matter of fact, it still is an agricultural area. I think that originally the plan was, and I don't think I could prove this beyond reasonable doubt, but I think the original idea was to have this as part of an industrial complex along with the match factory. But it has become an agricultural thing, and it's significant because, as we will see as I progress, Diamond Match, besides making matches and lumber, was heavily involved in agricultural activities in Butte County. Okay, so early 1900s, they purchased the property, and by 1906, they pretty much had, maybe not everything, but pretty much everything there. I'll come back to this slide and talk more about it. This is an artist rendition of what it looked like, the site, in 1906. This is a photo, just we won't dwell on, but you can look at the photo and kind of verify that the artist kind of knew what he was doing. So I want to go through a little bit of what Dave touched on to kind of indicate the importance of this facility. This is a 1927 photo, and the point here is that this is a massive industrial site. And I would point out that back in the background, in 1927, I think that's a prune orchard. That's right on the Barber Yard, so-called now, site. And just, I always have, when I look at aerial photos, trouble figuring out my orientation. So this just gives you, this is 16th Street, which back in the day was called Del Norte. So back down here is the match factory, and this is the engineering building, which we'll talk more about. But that's 16th Street. This is another aerial photograph just demonstrating that in 1965, 60 years later, this was still a major going operation in Chico. And we were unable to find any decent aerial photographs of this site after 65. But if you recall from the chronology, it was sold in 84, so there's a kind of a gap of pictures, but it didn't change much. So this leads me to trying to, if I need to, impress upon you how important Diamond Match was to the Chico community. And Old Hutch characterized, there were 5 events that really earmarked Chico as a better than Los Molinos. And I don't know, I may forget one of them, but in 1860, Bidwell came. That was significant. 1887 or thereabouts, Chico Normal School came. And Ray may have to help me here. The Northern California-Oregon Railroad came in 1887 or thereabouts. And perhaps surprising, he characterized the flying school that kind of initiated our airport as a major thing, and then of course Diamond Match. They provided a huge amount of employment, brought in a lot of people into the Chico area. There were typically hundreds of people employed down at the Barber site, and I have read, without any good verification, that if you counted the people at the Diamond Match site in Barber and all the employees in the logging operation and the Sterling City sawmill, they would probably approach a couple thousand people. Don't quote me on that. But there's no question but what the employment at Diamond Match and their facilities was a big boom for Chico, in particular with housing. They didn't really specifically create housing, but the developers created housing. And somebody pointed out, maybe it was Ray, that probably the development of the Chico Vecino up north of town was not by Diamond Match, but a spin-off of the need for more housing. I don't know if I mentioned this, but a major rabbit hole that Ray went down, I'm not sure he's out of it yet, had to do with the streetcar system that existed, and that led to railroads. And if you have questions about, putting him on the spot, local railroad history, why, he's the man to talk to. I'll talk more about social activities that they provided. But here it is in 2020. The only thing that is left is what we'll see is the engineering building and this little called the small storage building. That's all left of the facilities. So how did this happen? So let's go through the development. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on each one of these, but I'll just point out that they had an ongoing sash and door factory, a box factory I'll talk about. They had an engineering department, machine shop, foundry, and the match factory. They had a lot of things that were happening at this site. So in 1904, the first construction was an engine house. As I said, they initially became heavily involved in Butte County Railroad and having a railroad up to Sterling City and railroad tracks all over the logging area. And this was not only where they stored the engines and moved them around, but initially the shop before they got other structures going. You probably don't care, but you might ask, where was that? And it's of interest, I guess, that it was down in this area is the match factory. It was way off up in here. But what I found particularly interested in the Google map, the aerial view, this printing here is right from the Google map. They identify where the original engine house was without any elaboration. So in 1905, they had completed the engineering, the forge and foundry. And this is a side view. This is the engineering building that still exists out there. This is a forge, sometimes described as a machine shop. And this is really was interesting to me, is the foundry. A foundry is, maybe you know this, is a place that casts metal. Another rabbit hole. So it turned out that this engineering shop and the foundry was a lot more than you may think. So they created wheels for rail cars, among all kinds of other things. For engine repair, they could make it, cast it. So the engine repair of railroads, and I don't have exact details, but north of Sacramento was pretty much done at the engineering site in Chico. And my understanding is that there was no other foundry in Northern California north of San Francisco. So they did a lot of, I have no idea what the economics were, but they did a lot of work for that. And they got into manufacturing stuff. So this is what's called a logging donkey, and I don't remember, Ray probably remembers, he's good with much better memory than I have. But they made several of these and sold them. A logging donkey was, instead of using a donkey, this was a steam-powered winch that pulled logs up from the canyons or wherever. And this is a kind of a relation to their agricultural connections. They built this tractor for agricultural purposes, but alas, everything that they did didn't turn out too well. So I don't know, just looking at this is the cooling system, and looking at that huge, without knowing the details, that huge thing, it's a little hard to imagine that was ineffective. But it didn't work worth a damn. And the tracks of this tractor, which they made themselves, casting in the foundry, were too brittle. So they frequently broke. So this, despite the fact that they manufactured it and they sold some, but it wasn't a big success. Okay, moving on to some of the other places that were developed. There was a powerhouse which they burned wood fuel and generated steam power for operation of the facilities throughout the site. This was, and I don't know for how long, but for many, many years, the highest, tallest point in Chico. Little historical note there. There was a thriving box factory. You'd almost have a whole lecture on the box factory. So I got to impress you with my vocabulary now. Anybody besides Ray know what shook is? No. Shook is a wood that is prepared to make boxes. So what you see is piles of shook here. So I don't know percentages, but a lot of their boxes went into the, again, agricultural connection, into sales to the agricultural community for shipping of fruit. I think it was maybe the 50s, I'm not sure of that, before cardboard boxes really became common. So everything that was shipped was shipped in wooden boxes. So the box factory produced wooden boxes. So they have 144 boxes of matches in a big box. And I'll come back to some other details with respect to the apiary a little bit later. They had an ongoing sash and door plant, which I don't have any comments on. They had a plywood veneer plant, which was kind of inherited from Sierra Lumber. Reportedly, they had the first plywood produced in California, but they had trouble finding the right wood and the glue, and this was never a very successful operation. Finally, they closed it, tore it down, and planted grain and alfalfa. Another agricultural connection. So one of the things that was a little surprising to me is that they had, as we'll see in a moment, extensive retail outlets throughout the North State. And this was one in Chico. I think the location at this picture, but I can't be sure, was between 4th and 5th and Orange and Cherry. So relating to the retail outlets, Ray went down another rabbit hole. So it turns out that there were 64 retail outlets in Northern California, every wide spot in the road, because they had delivery services, but people didn't have pickup trucks to come pick everything up. So they had these, and Ray identified in some of these pictures, not 64 of them are in the book, of the various and sundry retail outlets. In 1906, they finished the general office, which, as we'll see later, I'll mention now, ultimately became Fairburn Hall. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Well, I'll tell you more about that in a moment. In 1906, the last building really constructed was the match factory. And it got off to a little shaky start. Anybody interested in a little chemistry here? Oh no, never mind. It turned out that in 1906, the matches that were being used were a little bit sketchy. So they had a habit of spontaneously igniting. And the match factory was ready to start up operation in July or August. And I don't know how serious they were, but there was problems with spontaneous combustion of matches in Chico's August climate. So it didn't probably really get started, the production of matches, these at this point were all wooden matches, until probably October or November because of the heat. Oh, I didn't take some. So this is, I don't know if you're familiar, there's wonderful maps that are not too complete. They're called Sanborn maps. This is one, and I have this just to show you the shape of the match factory. And you're saying, so who cares? I'll come back, and this is pertinent in a moment. And I'm not going to get into chemistry again, but there were strike anywhere matches that were developed. There was strike on the box matches, different chemistry involved, which I found fascinating and put in the book for reasons I still don't wonder why. And probably in 1930, kind of a wild guess, wooden matches began to become fading out, and book matches started coming in. There were still wooden matches being produced at the Barber facility, but and I can't give you, it has required additional equipment and printing processes and kind of major changes. I'll come back to talk about the apiary. This is one of my favorite topics, which will be brief. But in 1914, the apiary business, just out of curiosity, how many people knew that Diamond Match was really heavily into honey, an apiary? So an interesting thing happened in 1915. For administrative reasons, perhaps for economic reasons, I don't know if there was a downturn, but the lumber industry was very, very, very dependent upon economics. I don't know if we ever figured out really why, but at the Barber site, they quit the millwork activities and remanufacturing down there and moved the millworks to Chico. And Ray and I have talked about this. Why would they do that? And we don't have an answer, because they had the facilities down there. They didn't destroy them. They were perfectly, the box factory was operational, but they moved all that out of Barber and moved it to Chico. And if you're familiar with Chico campus, there's a rec center. So that's in 2nd and Orange, and that's where they moved the millworks operation from Barber in 1915. So on the one hand, for whatever reason, the millworks business was fading. They downsized, moved to Chico, but the match factory was going great guns. And this is a replay of what I showed before. This is the match factory, and this is in 1909, but this is as of 1906, that was this. This is a 1921 Sanborn map, but in 1916, the match factory was expanded and shown better here. This was the old site, and it expanded, and they included chemistry. It's chemistry time again. Slight digression, but before 1906, match production involved using white phosphorus, which turned out to be spontaneously igniting, but also highly toxic and caused dental problems. So in 1906, the world, and ultimately the United States, banned the use of white phosphorus. So when government does something, it takes a while. They often grandfather in. So it wasn't until 1916 that the Diamond Match facility got around to including the new chemistry that no longer used white phosphorus. And I don't know, part of that was what instigated the expansion of the building, but also there was new equipment that came in for the expansion. Repeat. Okay, somehow they decided that they had made a slight error in 1915, moving all the millworks to Chico, and 1920 they moved it all back. So in the meantime, and if you got questions afterwards, raise the one to ask. At some point, things became electrified, and they no longer really needed the power plant as generating steam and everything. So what was the original power plant was changed to the apiary. So this was the original power plant, but in 1920 when things came back, it became the apiary. It was absolutely amazing to me, everything that was going on with the apiary. So they had a brochure that came out with maybe a 2-page itemized list of everything that they sold, including queen bees and multiple hives, and they made the claim, and I verified that in another source they indicated it was the second largest bee supply factory in the world, but I won't quibble with their characterizing it as the biggest. But it was a going operation, just absolutely amazing. And this, I warned you that I would mention the box factory again. Box factory was involved in making beehives, and this is just one of, I think, 5 different beehives. They have simple beehives and 5-story elaborate beehives. So they had a lot of beehive activity in the box factory. There could be a whole talk on the honey thing, and this is, again, just briefly related to their connection with the agricultural community. I think the way this started, they would accept honey from beekeepers, 5 gallons of honey, in exchange for, I don't know, wood or queen bees or hives or whatever. It seems like a pretty mundane operation. By 1938, they were, or maybe it was in the 40s, I guess it was in the 40s, they were shipping in railroad cars 2 carloads of honey to Pacific Fruit in Seattle. 2 carloads a month. So that boggles my mind how the bees made all that honey. But anyway, so they became a major marketer and marketed it under the Diamond brand of honey. So when they moved back, so I showed you the picture of their main office, which I alluded to the fact that it became known as Fairburn Hall. So they built a new office. And the reason for that is when they moved to Chico, the millworks, they decided to turn the old office building over to the employees as a recreational educational facility. And when they moved back, they didn't feel comfortable in kicking the employees out of their building, so they just built a new office building. I'm not covering this, but now I guess I am covering it. Fairburn Hall was named after the president of Diamond Match at the time, and they ultimately moved the whole building kind of up in the area where that white storage facility is, and it went through a variety of uses with church-related activities and whatnot. I think they gave it to Chico State. So anyway, they have a new office. Yeah, we're doing okay. I want to, other than the impact economically on Chico, they had a huge impact on Chico activities, which were primarily oriented towards employee facilities. But it went it spilled out into the community. So as an example, they had employee dances, but the community was invited. So just highlighting a few things that they did. They provided a swimming pool, which wasn't real successful because they got this water out of the ground and it was a little chilly. And I think it was described as cold as hell. They provided a tennis court. This is the match factory, so just west of the match factory they had a tennis court. They had a band of certainly employees, but if you're a Chico resident, why, you're welcome to participate. And this doesn't show it too well, except you can kind of see that would make a reasonable baseball field. So anybody remember anything about, not remember, that gets into age-related issues. Have you heard of the Chico Colts? It's a baseball team. Diamond Match was, I would say, largely responsible for the Chico Colts. They funded them early on. There was a trolley league and they ran into financial difficulties, so Diamond Match sponsored it. It became the Diamond Colts, I think. And they provided employment for baseball players. So they were heavily involved in, it turns out Fairburn was a baseball fanatic. And in 1916, they had what was billed as a Little World Series in Chico. Well, it was limited Little World Series. It was a game between a Diamond Match facility in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and the Chico team.
Oh my God.
So, I'm sorry if it seems like I'm dumping on Ray too much, but Ray has very little interest in sports. But he got involved in trying to ferret out details about the baseball. And not just Diamond Match related, but Chico baseball, and there is, and if you may not remember this with Liz's presentation, but part of the presentation was about Shearer Park. And well, this drove Ray crazy for, are you over that by now? Nope. So there was a very, very active baseball, and still to be determined exactly where they played and when it kind of all went away. Okay, I think we're doing okay time-wise. So if you remember, probably don't, from the Diamond Match sold in 1984 the facility to, oh, it's down here, to Louisiana Pacific. But in 1975, for reasons I don't think we're fully aware of, the match factory was closed. And it had to do with the Bic lighter and maybe economic downturns. They moved away from wooden matches, moved almost exclusively, not totally, to book matches. And anyway, and there was a strike, which maybe this is not entirely accurate, but the workers struck and Diamond Match said, screw it, we're closing the match factory. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but the match factory closed in 1978. They pretty much completed the demolition, which was interesting because, well, two things. Most or almost all of the facilities out there had basements. And they just plowed the match factory into the basement. And, you know, it wasn't like a demolition where they take the remnants and haul it off. They just plowed it in, covered it with dirt, and said this is going to be nice for a park. And we ponder why that is. Would you like to hear my pessimistic view, cynical view? I think they just buried all the hazardous chemicals underneath the match factory. But I have no evidence of that. If you're at all familiar with what's going on out there now, there's a site that is paved over, which is not where the match factory was. That's a different hazardous site. So my conjecture that it had something to do with, don't repeat that. So in 1994, this is all that was left. The engineering building, the foundry was still there. This is the warehouse. This is a little storage building. And back here is the apiary. This is a 1994 picture of the apiary. So when they sold it in '84, and we don't know when they to what extent the apiary, but Louisiana Pacific continued operating the apiary until the site closed. And I don't have details on that. This is a 2000 picture of the warehouse. And 2004, most of you remember when the apiary, and also in 2004, I believe the warehouse was burned by vandals. So this is from the Enterprise record. And 2020 or 2022, this is what's left. This is the engineering building, and the various, there have been two major efforts to try to have a development out there, and I think the current developer is toying with the idea of trying to keep the engineering building and do something with it. And this is a small storage building which had another interesting little story to it. And I think they would like to try to retain that too in whatever they do, but who knows. Okay, this is going to be brief. The legacy is, as Liz and Paul pointed out, the Barber neighborhood. There's some really beautiful homes out there that were Diamond Match homes, and that's kind of misleading. They weren't really built by Diamond Match, but they were built for Diamond Match employees, and these homes were for kind of executives. They're kind of nice homes. Liz or Paul, Liz I guess alluded but didn't talk very much. I guess there's not too much to say yet. But there is currently a barber yard plans for development. A guy by the name of Gonzalez has purchased the property and is pretty serious about developing it, and is having community meetings and whatnot. But that's several years away probably from getting all the approvals that are necessary. As Ray kind of suggested, he is still in the baseball rabbit hole. I think he's still in railroad rabbit holes. And who knows what else. And I am still, what I would like to do is to delineate more carefully the relationship of diamond match to the agricultural community. So I'm working on that, but who knows? And now, timely, the remaining rabbit hole, which I kind of committed to just a tiny bit, I don't know if you got Ray, but the boxes that came from Dean, that could be another rabbit hole. Okay, that's all, folks. The question is, what was the origin of the diamond label? One was, it was a history of the Diamond Match Company. It was they were founded, that's not the right word, incorporated, thank you, in Massachusetts, which was a diamond state. But the alternative story, and this is true, whether this affected the name or not, I don't know, but initially the shape of the matches was a diamond. They weren't square or round, they were diamond cut. So take your pick. Huh?
I have to ask the chemistry question. What makes a match a match?
So I would suggest that you come up and get my email, because I apologize to Ray and whoever will listen. There's probably 6 to 10 pages, I forget, on match chemistry in this. Now you may be the only person that's interested in that. So it's a complex issue. Somebody else had a question over there? The contributor of the Dean. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. Joe?
I will make a comment. I read your little 94 pages, and what I was interested in was the difference in the wood for wood matches. You could only use certain wood for wood matches.
Well, and it was, talk to Ray. So I alluded to the fact that there was an English company that was a collaborator or there was a joint venture that they weren't interested in matches. They were interested in lumber. And I don't know all the details of wood, but different types of wood have different primary uses. As an example, sugar pine was what they used in beehives. And they had a lot of trouble finding the right wood for matches. There is one example, I don't remember, I will say carloads, train loads of matches that were shipped to Los Angeles area, and they were worthless. They just unloaded them and burned them down there. So it was not a simple matter to find the right wood to make matches. Dave?
I'm just going to throw a little bit of commentary in there. I think I remember reading that Diamond Match was already a going concern there in the Great Lakes country and had already put a factory into place to make these diamond matches. Then I believe maybe that English financier came into the picture, and both Diamond and the additional financiering wanted to come to California because the sugar pine and the right kinds of wood were beginning to run short there in the Great Lakes as the harvesting of that whole region had been going on for some time there. So they scouted out California and ended up here in Chico, where, yes, the sugar pine was really the favored wood. It split so nicely and so uniformly. And if you go back right here into the back part of the museum and look at our little window, that's still there on the diamond match, you'll see a little square, a little oblong piece of sugar pine that's all been split now into the little match sticks there, and how that all must have played out there. So again, they came here to find the sugar pine, but certainly the sugar pine was the favored and the most valuable forest wood here in California. The sugar pine, the fourth biggest tree in North America, behind the two redwoods and the Douglas fir. But, so a big mature, some of them were 15 feet through, these huge sugar pines. But once they were cut, the sugar pine didn't really regenerate out of that, what did we call the forest, the mature forest, the old growth forest. Instead, firs and cedars quickly grew up, and so the sugar pine really over time was harvested and really began to really lose its place in the California forest. So again, a great program by both Ray and
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ray, thank you so much.